Hi everyone, my name is Jaime Thissen, and today I'll be talking about the development of sustainability and safety metrics of greenhouses in the continental United States. The goal of this study is to develop a sustainability score for greenhouse crop production. This score is indicative of the sustainability performance of key indicators at a particular facility. Some of the reasons why we want to do this study is, first of all, it's never been done before in as dynamic of a fashion. Um, we also are interested in examining the workforce participation from owner operators down to migrant workers and student interns. Also, there has been a consistent failure of sustainability projects documented in the literature over the last 15 to 20 years. The literature review, what we found was that field to market was the closest and most applicable study to what we were doing. However, that is focused on outdoor agriculture and excluded some of the soft parameters such as safety and leadership and management and adaptability. And those four aspects really tend to go hand in hand. Some of the practical applications we have for this project is that both direct and indirect costs will be reduced. In particular, when safety considerations are factored in, we will see a reduction of indirect costs. And also there is the potential for the findings of this study to be applied to life support systems and space missions that have been proposed for both the moon and for Mars. So this is a site out in Southern California, and one of the things that comes to mind is the structure is not what we would think of to be a greenhouse. However, full greenhouses are not actually needed to grow plants in this particular climate, depending on the needs of the producer. This type of awning is actually fairly common in this part of the country due to the weather and the climatic conditions. You can see here that several plants are grouped together by type, and they also have labels. And the label, which ideally is where our S score would be, is facing outward in a lot of cases. And this is part of a technique that is called facing that you've probably seen done in a department store or a grocery store previously. One of the challenges with safety in this particular case is you have a lot of objects here that are bulky. You have a lot of plants that are kind of growing out of their, in some cases, perhaps even overgrowing out of their respective pots. And this creates objects that are both heavy and bulky. If you've ever potted any container such as this, if you've done gardening or horticulture work previously, you know that that the soil compaction can greatly increase the weight of the object. And what we observe here is a lot of employees who are bending over and they're doing a lot of twisting and turning, particularly if they're trying to face the objects in the proper direction. This is another photo of the same site. And you can also see here too that with this woody mulch on the surface, it's actually difficult to get objects such as carts and other delivery vehicles that might actually be helpful for moving some of these objects. And it would be easier if this surface was cement, as we see in this photograph here, which I think is a little bit closer uh, to what folks think of when they think of a greenhouse. The problem with this particular setup is that water can collect in these indentations along the floor here, and that in turn creates multiple slip hazards on a daily basis. There are boons that will come and they will water these plants, and one of the challenges as well is you will also have workers and customers occupying essentially the same space, and so thus they are basically exposed to the same hazards. And one of the things that we see too is a lack of personal protection equipment, also known as PPE, and that is problematic. Although these plants, a lot of them seem harmless, I've observed in my extension work that people have gotten cut up pretty good if they're not, for instance, if they're not wearing the proper gloves for pruning the plants. Um, if you're digging around and you're pulling out weeds, it's actually not that difficult for some of the thicker stems of the plants for you to cut your fingers on. And I've seen some pretty good gashes in my time. This particular greenhouse is located in northern Minnesota. One of the issues that is apparent in this photo are trip hazards with all of these hoses laying around. This looks somewhat chaotic, but it actually is rather organized, as different products are or similar products rather are grouped together. And you can see in the front here with some of these tomato plants and some of the smaller vegetables that are growing in these trays here. If you're shopping here and you have kids running around, this is problematic. They don't have as good of coordination, and so they can be running around and they can be tripping over these different objects. This is actually taken after Mother's Day, which is one of the busiest holidays of the season for greenhouse facilities in North America. This hazard is a little bit unique, because spacing in greenhouses is at a premium. They will often employ the hanging basket displays. If you've ever heard one of these break off and fall, it sounds like a gunshot going off, especially if you have a clay pot that hits something along the lines of concrete or cement flooring. Uh, as I indicated before, these objects can actually be quite heavy with the soil compaction. So the wires that are attached to the rafter here have to have the proper tensile strength. And one of the things you need to factor into is that workers and customers, it's probably not a question of so much as if but when they're going to come in there and they're going to want to look at this. They're going to be turning these objects around and sticking their hands in there, and if you're putting weight down, or if you're twisting around the wire, those are actions that can physically make it weaker. And it would be not good if one of these objects landed on someone's head or on their back or on their foot, especially if they weren't wearing if they were wearing sandals instead of steel-toed boots or something of that nature. So this is uh, greenhouses certainly have safety challenges that need to be addressed. I think everyone has seen some figure like this before regarding sustainability. Again, we want to focus on some of the more softer parameters. It's very difficult to be able to train and educate your workforce if you do not have adequate management and leadership, and this really starts at the top. Um, in this particular study, we looked at 40 greenhouse sites. Today, I will be presenting information on 20 of those sites. We have a wide range of sizes and different types of greenhouses. We covered pretty much every area from the Mid-Atlantic to the Pacific Northwest. A base sustainability equation is looking at 6 key factors, including safety. For safety, the one thing that I think folks really like to hone in on is the presence of glass. A lot of organic certification will actually require daily inspections of every plant for the presence of glass, and that was a significant finding in our literature review. However, it's some of the other hazards that often are overlooked. Um, glass, broken glass is not really a big issue for a lot of greenhouses. One, because it's something they pay attention to, and two, because the only time you're really going to have a major problem with glass is if you have uh, a severe thunderstorm or some kind of difficult weather event that and the structure is relatively weak. That's when you're going to see the glass become a hazard. So the scale that we used for this study ranges from a 0 to a 10. A 0 just means that it's not applicable. A score of 1 is the worst, a score of 10 is the best. Most of the scores were found to be in the range of about 4.5 to 8.5. So decent to moderately acceptable standards. Um, Looking at some of the results here for the Southwest region for safety metrics, the value was just underneath a 7, with flood management and personal protection equipment being some of the weaker aspects of this particular region. The Northeast had a somewhat similar score here in the mid sevens, about 7. I think it was 7.3 was the average. Again, we're seeing kind of a trend here of a lack of personal protection equipment that has been observed on site. This is also true of the Florida region, which had the weakest average at just above 6 for safety metrics. The Midwest did a little bit better overall, but again, we're seeing this. The concerning trend here is PPE. I think a lot of these other factors can be improved upon, but the concern that we're seeing throughout the continent is the lack of PPE, the lack of using gloves, the lack of safety goggles, in some cases the lack of training regarding personal protection equipment, particularly at some of the smaller sites. This is looking at the sites overall. The overall average was just a little bit over 7, which isn't a terrible start, but I think we can really, with some safety planning and applications of things like the 9 elements of safety, and with some consulting with horticultural extension, I think we can probably get that up to maybe closer to a 9, if not closer to a 9.5 average. So there is actually that this does look really good at first glance, but there's a lot of room for improvement. In terms of the overall metric, was actually the safety scores were actually better. This was a little bit surprising, because safety is typically one of the last things that is looked at, with the exception of the larger sites. Um, and we had sites that were not only large but also medium, and some very small sites as well. So most of the facilities had a combination of vegetables and flowers. There were exceptions to that. Nearly every greenhouse that I have visited has had some kind of succulent or flowers that they are growing, and that's just because they get the biggest return on their investment for that. Some of the losses with vegetables can be as high as 50 or 60%. So that's a significant loss. Um, and as you might expect, the more sustainable facilities were those who took the active approach, and that's also very true of health and safety. It's pretty difficult to have an operation in agriculture where that's safe, and not have an active safety culture. Overall, the best S score was safety. That's a little bit of a surprise there. And materials maintenance, regarding health and safety, that was rated as fairly average, and all sites had a gravimetric water drainage. So there was no pumping involved, and the disadvantage with that is that you're going to have that water pooling on those hard surfaces, and you're going to have the slip hazards. Also, the one thing I would point out too is that it's very important for all staff to be trained in order for this to work. It's really not going to suffice to have folks coming in who are interns or migrant workers, or folks who have recently been to college and engage in who have had experience in safety, if that culture does not exist at upper management. There's real the health and safety training that has occurred has really become a limiting factor. So it's very important for safety culture to have from leadership from the top down. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.